Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren, aye. Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Aguilar?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mrs. Murphy?
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy, aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Mrs. Luria?
Aye.
Mrs. Luria, aye. Mr. Kinzinger?
Kinzinger, aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, aye.
I mean, I don't think anyone ever wants to text their mom, I don't know if I'm going to be okay.
In terms of a sinister or worrying thing, this is the worst thing I've covered in the United States.
January 6th, when I think back on that day, I remember a conversation with my wife early that morning who asked me, do you really think you need to go into the Capitol that day?
At around 9 o'clock, there were already protesters gathered on the East Lawn in front of the, between the Capitol and the Supreme Court. And a lot of them were, a lot of them looked like they had just come off a tour bus in Las Vegas. It looked like somebody's grandmother who was just sitting there in a lounge chair with the Trump flag planted in the lawn.
I really didn't think that much of it because, protests around the Capitol aren't an unusual thing. And as I'm walking to the Senate office buildings, there are these police squad cars just screaming down the road.
But I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
When I got there, I went to the west front of the Capitol. There were several thousand people there, and it just struck me as such a weird and kind of medieval scene in a way, that it's 2021, you're at the capital of the most powerful nation on earth, and there are people kind of flying flags from the ramparts and trying to take the fort. That in itself was just a very peculiar thing to see.
I remember walking across the first floor of the CBC, so the top level of the CBC, and I could just hear all of this noise, and it hadn't really clicked in my mind necessarily what was going on to the degree that it was outside. But I remember some cops who were up in the crypt turning around and looking at me and kind of looking at me with this look of, what are you doing out here by yourself?
Things started to take a really bad turn between the hours of 1 p.m. when the certification process began and about 2:30.
Of course, the Capitol was breached at 2:11, and we could hear over the intercom that there were different announcements that were being made across the Capitol complex. At one point, one of the House buildings was locked down.
No entry or exit is permitted at this time in any of the Capitol complex buildings. You may move throughout the building, but stay away from exterior windows and doors.
This officer explains to me, she says, we've been breached. I can't let you in. And I'm thinking, what?
The closer you got to the Capitol, the more sinister it became.
Sitting outside the Capitol, I didn't see any cops whatsoever. I mean, it was usually the East Front is well patrolled, and I didn't see a single officer anywhere. It was kind of like, Lord of the Flies. People were just doing whatever they wanted to.
I was standing with my colleague Mike Lillis at that time, and he points out, he says, look, there's police officers running at us, running down the staircase.
And the cops turned and started running towards us, and they said, "Get the hell out of here."
And they screamed out to us, "You guys need to run. You guys need to run."
And we said, well, if the cops are running, then we should probably do the same thing.
That was a moment where survival mode sort of kicked in and your adrenaline kicked in. And although we wanted to sort of document as much as we could what was happening. That's certainly why I pulled out my iPhone and started recording. There's a moment when you know that it's time to cut and run, and that was certainly that moment.
Things kind of escalated from there very quickly, I guess. We were basically given a choice of either staying out in the gallery or being locked in the chamber with the senators.
I was corresponding with one of my colleagues at the time, Juliegrace Brufke, who was our designated reporter in the House chamber, up in the press gallery, who was observing what was happening on the House floor.
Before the breach happened, like standing there with Mike and Scott, and we're all kind of like, we knew it was going to be like a long night since they were going to be contesting results, and so it was like, I was like, all right, I'll take the first shift in the chamber. And I was like, oh shit, I'm really gonna take the wrong shift. When they first closed all the doors and kind of gavelled out, sitting in the chamber, I just remember getting really nervous. All of a sudden, I mean, they're handing out gas masks. You don't ever expect that to happen. You know, you see these things, you see these drills, staffers, and you never think you actually have to use these things.
You know, like, things are serious when they're locking you inside the Senate chamber. Like, that's never been something that I've had to do before.
Shortly thereafter, a police officer ran into our area as well, covering his eyes and really screaming out in agony. And apparently he had been either pepper sprayed or bear sprayed by some of the rioters in the eyes.
There were also injured Capitol police officers who were being dragged down those same stairs and into that little cubby inside the Capitol Visitor Center. I do remember one cop in the middle of two others, and it looked like, we thought he had been shot. It looked like he couldn't use his legs. So he was either unconscious or he'd been hurt in his lower half so much that he couldn't support his own weight.
The scariest part, I think, was like when you're like on the floor, it's like everyone get under your chairs, and like laying there and just hearing, I mean, when you heard, like, not knowing if it was a gunshot and then afterwards finding out that that was a gunshot, it was like, oh wow, that's...
So Amy Klobuchar, I guess, heard what they were trying to say and stood up in the back and said, you know, shots have reportedly been fired. We should take this seriously.
I don't think I'd ever seen so many people, I mean, people that I wouldn't expect to look as terrified as they were. I mean, you see people in such a different capacity of just kind of like, kind of that moment of panic and how everybody's trying to rush out and everybody kind of trying to comfort each other. At that point, they eventually kind of got us all out of the chamber, and right when you walked outside up on the third floor, I remember looking to my right and there were just people with zip ties on the floor that were being arrested. I think one of the scariest things was getting to that room where they're letting everybody else in, where it's supposed to be kind of the safe area, and being like, oh wait, no, you guys can't come in. Ruben took a group of us and kind of locked us in there, and we were there for hours. And honestly, I mean, eventually they found a place to vacate everybody else, but if it weren't for Ruben, I really don't know what I would have done at that time. I mean, I was kind of hysterical at that point. I mean, I was terrified. You know, you never think something like that's going to happen.
My wife, texted me and she was like, you need to come home immediately.
The fact that there were people in Ireland and England in real time responding and, touchingly kind of worried about me, that was, I think, a signifier more broadly that this was like a global event that people were watching unfold and was very significant.
I think a lot of us, spent a lot of time just texting family members, letting them know we were okay. And I remember we had like one phone charger for, there were like, got that many journalists and everybody's trying to kind of get information into their bosses too, all kind of trying to switch off to make sure our phones were charged.
May God bless all who serve here and those who protect this place. And may God bless the United States of America. Let's get back to work.
So finally I finally got back in at 10 o'clock at night, and after everyone had been cleared out, and I was walking around the first floor of the building with actually Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, and we were both kind of surveying the damage for the first time, and we were both kind of in this state of disbelief. Just like it was surreal, really.
You know, there's still the mist of all the bear sprays and the pepper sprays are still kind of in the air. There's debris everywhere.
But I mean, after a day of that, it's like leaving the Capitol, it's like, are people still going to be out there? Or like, you know, things have been cleared out. But I mean, after that much chaos, I remember in the press gallery, after like everything was so tense, and I feel like everybody was very like kind of coming off of like an extremely scary and hectic day.
And then I see in the middle of the hallway here on the first floor of the Senate, as I'm leaving, there's this trash can, janitor's trash can, and sticking out of it is this kind of this Tea Party flag, the yellow flag with the coiled snake and the motto, "Don't tread on me." And I just remember seeing that, and it was very symbolic.
I want to say it was about 4:30 in the morning that we were finally walking home. And it was just as peaceful as could be. There was almost no one on the street. You couldn't tell anything that had happened.
I think I was in some ways a state of denial about it for weeks, because I didn't really want to, just speaking on a very personal basis, like I resist things that, kind of turn my world upside down. And I don't want to acknowledge them.
Sort of the gravity of what was going on, I don't think hit me until, a couple of days later.
That day, we only saw a sliver of what was actually happening outside of the Capitol. And it really did take one day, 1 week, 1 month to process that event.
People went through so much worse than I did that day. I mean, it was scary, but I came out pretty unscathed. But I mean, it's, the amount of chaos and the amount of, I feel like the lack of preparation to handle something like that happening, I think was pretty shocking. I think looking at the footage afterwards, and as more videos come out, seeing what the Capitol Police dealt with inside the building, in those tunnels, and it's, I think I knew it was bad while it was happening, but I think seeing that, the magnitude of it was even more intense than I had realized at the time.